writer is an expert in the science, medicine, law and politics of cannabis. During his early career as an advertising copywriter and creative director, he developed expertise in the pharmaceuticals, healthcare and medicine. Since the 1990s, he's worked as a communications consultant and medical journalist, and actively involved in the cannabis law reform since 1970s. He's given evidence to Parliament on the subject in 1983 and has been a forefront campaigner for the legalization of cannabis, for the legal cannabis industry. He's president of CLEAR Cannabis Law Reform and the UK's largest and longest established cannabis group. And we're going to be talking this morning about the current issues, I think starting off with novel foods, correct?
Well, we're getting to that pretty quick, yes. Yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming. I'm here today representing Cannapro, the trade association for the UK's cannabis, CBD and hemp businesses. Now, as many of you will know, I, together with Tony Calamita and Tom Rowland, the directors of Love Hemp, were the original founders of the CTA. And we launched Cannapro in the second half of 2018 in order to provide a lower cost alternative to businesses seeking support and representation in, let's face it, what is a very difficult market. So really Cannapro takes forward the original principles on which the CTA was founded and tries to make it more available to more people. We've now certified some 70 businesses which we monitor for compliance and represent to the authorities and provide support as needed. We've also, since the very beginning, promoted the Cannapro certified badge to consumers as a mark of quality, safety and reassurance. So I've been very interested to learn more about the CTA's idea for Trust Canna, and of course the Centre for Medicinal Cannabis is flying the idea of what they call a kite mark. Now these are of course all the same idea, and indeed these were part of the original concept of the CTA. And in the short to medium term, I certainly expect to see all these work alongside each other, and if they provide reassurance to consumers, then that's a very good thing. I think all these organisations are in the business of providing serious compliance advice, and that's a good thing. And in the longer term, Cannapro would certainly be open to the possibility of an independent quality mark that the entire industry could sign up to with common standards. I mean, I think that a number of people who've tried this have had ideas perhaps above their station in terms of where it can go, and it does need to be an independent organisation. It needs to come, I'm sorry to say, from governments, but I mean that's what governments are for. I'm no fan of governments, no fan of politicians, and you'll find that as I go on a little further, but I mean these are the sort of things that we do need government for and that we do need politicians to act on. But in the meantime, we will continue to promote the Cannapro certified badge across social media. We're also currently working on a cooperative advertising scheme with the Hemp Cooperative, whose stand is just over there. They're a group of smaller CBD companies. We were delighted, in fact, that 2 of them won awards in the award show last night. Now, I think it's important to say that we don't compete with the CTA or with any other trade association. In fact, we don't actively market our services. It may seem strange, but we're not particularly looking to recruit new members. This is because we provide Cannapro as a service to the industry. We don't make any money out of it. In fact, it costs us money, to be frank. Because as many of you will know, Cannapro is part of CLEAR. I am the president of CLEAR, and CLEAR is the longest established cannabis group in the UK. We were founded in 1999. We have, and our follower and membership base actually exceeds all other UK drugs policy groups combined. We lead the cannabis campaign in the UK where others now follow. And these are our aims and objectives. The overall one, to end the prohibition of cannabis. Number 2, to promote as a matter of urgency and compassion the prescription of medicinal cannabis by doctors. Now we know that the law has changed recently, but again, as you'll all know, we're a long way away from this actually being a reality. Number 3 is really about legalization, a system of regulation for the production and supply of cannabis. Number 4, industrial hemp, and number 5, education. So Cannapro is very much part of the CLEAR campaign. That's why we run Cannapro. That's why we call it a service to the industry, because we very much see a properly regulated legal cannabis market as the way to drive reform. It started, the CBD market started around about 2012. It was really about people who began to hear about the medicinal benefits of cannabis, wanting to access those legally. As we say, there are different estimates, and none of them are really very authoritative, but I mean, it's now believed it could be worth as much as 300 million a year. And it has been a major driver of cannabis law reform. If it wasn't for the CBD industry, if it wasn't for what's happened with CBD over the last 5 or 6 years, then I don't believe the reforms last year would have taken place. Because CBD has taken a lot of stigma away from cannabis. People are now much more open to it, much more willing to talk about it. It's about destigmatizing cannabis. Just a brief history of legal cannabis in the UK. Many people don't realise this, it's been cultivated for thousands of years. We'll get onto novel foods a bit later, but this is one of the most extraordinary things about it. Even the Guinness Book of Records, which may not be thought of as a great scientific source, but it's nevertheless an important source. The Guinness Book of Records says cannabis is the oldest cultivated crop. Only 100 years ago and more, it was as common in the fields of Great Britain as wheat or barley. Again, people find this very difficult to understand, but this is the truth. While cannabis was growing as freely as they. In 1928, the first Dangerous Drugs Act came in, and we banned cannabis. A lot of people, again, don't know that it wasn't actually until 1964 that the cultivation of cannabis was banned. And so it's between 64 and 93, which is when industrial hemp licensing was introduced. That's the only period of time in the UK when we have not had a legal cannabis industry. Just that brief period of 30 years. The next milestone was 2010 when Sativex, a cannabis oil, a whole, let's get it right now, it's not what it's described as, it's a whole plant cannabis oil made out of 2 different strains of cannabis to achieve a 50-50 ratio of THC to CBD, but don't make any mistake, Sativex is simply whole plant cannabis oil. As I said earlier, 2012 was the start of the CBD industry, and then last year we had this breakthrough moment when cannabis-based products for medicinal use were launched. So I've explained why Cannapro exists, very much to drive reform in the industry. This is what we offer, and this is why it's not a money-making venture. There are no membership fees. We charge a one-off £120 application fee, which basically covers the cost of certifying your business. We look at all your marketing, we look at your website, we ask some key questions. Normally takes about 2 to 3 weeks. And then one thing I will say, which is certainly of interest to me, is I have noticed in the last 6 months, everybody who has come to us has required guidance. Prior to that, most people arrived fully compliant. But in the last 6 months, there seems to be more and more instances of unauthorized medical claims coming forward and other issues. As I say, it's a service provided to the industry, and it will accelerate progress towards the day when we have full legalization and access to this most important plant in all its forms. And I just thought that was a good opportunity to put up a picture of a very beautiful lady. So with all that as background, I'd like to broaden this out to the widest possible context about cannabis. I congratulate the organisers of this show on this, the second instance of it, but particularly on its wide scope. Personally, I wish it was called the Cannabis Show, just simply the Cannabis Show, rather than the Hemp CBD Expo, but that's not within my purview. I think it's just great how it encompasses the legal market, the reform campaign, and the drive towards making cannabis a legitimate and accessible medicine. Because I know from many years' experience that this plant can do an awful lot of good in this world, and the more people that can benefit from it for all sorts of purposes, the better for us all. And over the past 18 months, I've spent thousands of pounds in attending many of the cannabis-related conferences and things that have sprung up Some have just been ludicrously expensive, and I'd go so far as to say exploitative. And you know, a lot of them have been attended by almost nobody except bankers and investors, and many of them can afford to spend £1,000 on attending a conference that lasts a few hours. So again, I congratulate the fact that this show is very reasonably priced. It encompasses everybody. It's also, I think, again, important to say it's run by decent people who are responsible and want to provide value for money, and that's not the case in large parts of this industry. So I hope you'll all come back in February for the next event, and after that, and after that. Now, I don't get paid a salary by CLEAR or by Cannapro. This is a voluntary role. We're a voluntary organisation. We're entirely funded by membership fees. And ever since I was first elected as leader in 2011, happily financially things have improved, and I do actually get paid all my expenses now, which is something of a breakthrough. But at last it has paid off. I've continued to earn my living primarily as a medical journalist and a writer, but now at last, with the things that have happened recently, I've been able to take my knowledge and experience in cannabis and turn it into an income stream. And I now market myself as an expert in the science, medicine, law, and politics of cannabis. Now, I'm not a scientist. I'm not a doctor. I'm certainly not a lawyer, and whilst I dabble in politics every day, I certainly don't make my living as a politician. So whether I'm really an expert in any of these things is for you to judge. I enjoy sharing my knowledge in all these aspects of cannabis, and I'm open to questions about any of them. So please do challenge me if you want to. I'm quite happy to be challenged by anybody about anything. I'm happy to take questions from now on, in fact. But what I'd like to try and do is shed some light on various aspects of the subject that we're all facing at the moment, and give you my view on them. I'm not saying I have all the answers, but I can just tell you what I think is going to happen. If we could start off with some audience participation straight away. How many people here, put your hand up if you would regard yourself as being in the CBD business? And of those people who are in the CBD business, this is where we get really controversial here. How many of you voted to remain? Oh, that's a rather better result than I expected, actually. I mean, I am a Brexiteer and a proud Brexiteer. And for me, novel foods is the perfect microcosm of the EU. Because what we've had here is a situation where a group of faceless bureaucrats have got together behind closed doors and dreamt up a law which is completely, well, they call it a law. Let me say it's not a law, it's simply an opinion. Dreamt up this idea that CBD and all cannabis extracts are novel foods. There's no basis in fact for it. They've been provided with evidence indicating there is no basis in fact with it. They've been provided with evidence showing that CBD and cannabis extracts were consumed as long ago as the 12th century. And they've simply dismissed this idea and are determined to railroad it through. Now, I've had many face-to-face meetings with the FSA. The FSA, of course, are all dutifully obeying their masters in the EU and want to continue obeying their masters in the EU even after we've left. What is going to happen? And I think this opens up into an even wider subject about the whole subject of enforcement. Because let's be honest, those of you here who are in the CBD business, you don't want these novel food regulations to be enforced. And you're quite right, why the hell should they be enforced when they're based on nonsense? On the other hand, there are certain regulations you want enforced. You know, you want decent testing of products enforced, so there's not heavy metals included. You want decent testing of products enforced so there are not excessive levels of THC in the product. You want, I think most of us want at least, we want the law enforced so that CBD sellers aren't being undercut by people selling what are called CBD flowers. You know, this is a debate, there's been an awful lot of debate about this. But on the other hand, you don't want the law enforced about tea. You don't want tea banned, but in fact tea is exactly the same substance as flowers. There's this myth that has grown up in the industry, and I've still heard lots of people talking about it over the last couple of days, that if you process leaves and flowers, somehow that makes them legal. It doesn't. It's nonsense. If you go through the Misuse of Drugs Act or the Misuse of Drugs regulations, nowhere does it say anything about processing. That is entirely a myth. Tea, if it's made of leaves and flowers, is just as illegal as flowers. But, certainly from Cannapro's point of view, we will not certify a seller who is selling flowers, but we will certify a seller who's selling tea. Now, you can say that's hypocritical of us, but I mean, the fact is that tea has been widely sold since even before the Misuse of Drugs Act came in. There's never been any intervention on it, and so you have to come to a compromise, or you have to come to pragmatism, if you like. So there's this whole question of what is going to be enforced, what do we want enforced, and what is going to be done about it. I mean, the other thing is that, during the time I was working with the CTA, I know the Health Food Manufacturers Association, Cannapro, we regularly report non-compliant businesses to the MHRA and to trading standards. Is anything ever done about it? No. Absolutely nothing is ever done about it. I mean, I've sat with, I won't mention names, a lot of you will know who he is, but I've sat with the head man at the borderline section and discussed this with him, and he's full of good intentions, but it's the same as if your car gets broken into, and you ring up the police and say, my laptop's been stolen about my car. What are you going to do about it? They say, oh, well, you can have a crime reference number, sir, for your insurance claim, and that's as much as you get. And that's exactly what goes on with the MHRA. There was a particularly heinous example a few weeks ago where in the Times, the newspaper that is supposed to be the newspaper above all others, ran what was a brazen editorial for a new Chi-Chi CBD shop in Marylebone Village, making heaps of medical claims. And not only do we have here the owners of the shop breaking the law which, let's remember, in theory can get you 2 years in jail. Not only do we have the owners of this shop breaking the law, but we had the Times breaking the law because it was an advertorial. The Times had been paid for running it, and therefore they were just as bound by the human medicines regulations, which is the law we're talking about here, as the shop was. Complained to the MHRA, it's just died a death. So things aren't being enforced anyway. Different people have different views on what they want enforced. The whole thing is a mess. And I think the only thing that organisations like Cannapro and the CTA and indeed the Centre of Medicinal Cannabis, if they're going to get involved, the only thing that we can do is try and be pragmatic. I think it's a great worry to me that the Centre for Medicinal Cannabis, who are new kids on the block, unfortunately, like everybody in this business, they tell you they're the first and the only. But in fact, they're only 5 minutes old relative to all the other people. But they've got right behind the EU on this. Now, why would they do that? I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I've always resisted conspiracy theories. But I see no other reason why they've got behind it other than the fact that they're an extremely well-funded organisation, better funded than anyone else in the business. And have therefore decided that if they support novel foods regulations, they can fund their business to produce a novel foods authorisation, and they'll get a march on everybody else. So what do I think is going to happen about novel foods? I don't think anything's going to happen for the foreseeable future. I think you may get a few rogue trading standards officers that will decide to take matters into their own hands. And of course, this is the problem, because they've got enormous powers. If they come into your shop or your warehouse and say they're going to seize that product, don't try and stop them, because you can be arrested and locked up. But on what basis are they doing this? They're doing this on the basis of the EU Novel Foods designation, which, let's remember, is not law. It's simply an opinion. And the only time it could ever become law is if somebody was to challenge it in court. So if little Mr. CBD shop on the corner gets his product seized, he's expected to stand up to the monolith of the EU with their, acres and acres and acres of lawyers, and it's impossible. So, but in reality, I don't think anything is going to happen. I think we're going to trundle on like this for at least the next 2 or 3 years, way past Brexit. So I think in that sense, I think you can all relax. But I do think it's still important for retailers and suppliers and producers to try and to be responsible. Does anyone have any questions about the novel food regulations? Anything I can explain or clarify?
Anybody?
No?
Anybody who has a question?
Everybody understand the novel foods regulations? Okay, good. Well, I'm very, very happy for you. So I thought the next subject we'd look at briefly was cannabis as medicine and what's happening here. I mean, again, I think there's an awful lot of confusion about what exactly has happened here. And again, as I said earlier, I'm no fan of governments, but I take my hat off to what our government has done on access to cannabis as medicine. The new regulations are incredibly flexible. There's no, contrary to what a lot of medical opinion will tell you, there is no restriction on the conditions to which it can be prescribed. There is no restriction on the methods by which it may be consumed, except that it can't be smoked. We were very involved with we were consulted by the MHRA and the Department of Health before the new regulations were formulated, and the golden ticket that we were aiming for was that they would allow flower and they would allow vaporizing, and I literally, you could have knocked me down with a feather when they went with this and they approved it. So I mean, I'm just amazed that the government went so far. And all these people who are complaining all the time that the government still hasn't done the right thing, the government, to be fair, has done the right thing. The government are not the people to blame on this anymore. The people to blame on this are the medical establishments. Now, there are many good doctors out there who have I was listening to the talk yesterday from my friend Mike Barnes and Danny Gordon, and two other doctors, one a GP, who have an incredibly enlightened view about cannabis. But most doctors are frightened of cannabis. They don't understand it. It requires a completely different approach to medicine, a completely different way of thinking. They don't understand. They think the idea that we say it can treat almost any condition is ridiculous. And that's why we should just dismiss it, because that obviously makes it nonsense. But that's because they don't understand the endocannabinoid system. They don't understand that it does affect almost every other system in the body. And so that potentially there is an application for cannabis in almost any condition. I think another thing that's important to say at this stage is that people shouldn't believe at this stage yet that cannabis is a curative medicine. Now, I know we've all heard the fantastic stories. You know, we've heard Callie Blackwell's story about her son and many other fantastic stories. I'm not denying those. But at the moment, cannabis is a proven, there's very, very good evidence for cannabis as a palliative medicine. And it's a fantastic palliative medicine with very few negative side effects. But there's no consistent, proven, reproducible method of showing it as being curative. I believe strongly, belief I think is the wrong word. I understand from all the evidence I've looked at that cannabinoids have curative potential in them. But we are a long way away from being able to harness that potential in a way that makes it something that you can prescribe in the way that doctors are used to prescribing conventional drugs. So I think it requires a completely different way of looking at medicine. And that's why doctors are having such a problem with it. I think as Mike Barnes said yesterday during their show, one of the problems, I think, with the recent reforms is that it's been given to specialists to prescribe. And a specialist is a specialist in neurology or in orthopedics or in gastroenterology. And so consequently, he or she probably knows nothing about cannabis at all, and is more concerned with their specific condition and what they need to be doing, as I say, is looking at it as a palliative medicine. Right, is there any questions about the recent medicinal reforms or any questions about the use of cannabis as medicine?
Any questions? We've got a quiet crowd today.
All very wise people, obviously. Huh? No question, right. All right, well, in that case, I thought that the final aspects that I wanted to deal with was legalization. I'm very encouraged by the work that is going on with my friend Phil Monk and his organisation, We the Undersigned, whose stand is just over there, who are trying to through democratic force and now potentially with legal challenge, open the way to overturning the laws against cannabis. Now, I've been very skeptical about this for a very long time. I've spoken to many lawyers, from QCs down to junior legal students over the years, and I've always been advised and I've always understood there is no human rights challenge to cannabis. And to go back to that subject that we all hear too much of at the moment, Parliament is supreme, and the act of Parliament that prohibits cannabis was agreed by Parliament and therefore cannot be overturned even by a court. But I understand, and I'm not fully briefed on it yet, but I understand there is now a growing belief that with all the precedents from around the world, there is a good possibility that we could seriously challenge the status of cannabis under UK law. And that would be a wonderful thing. Because that's really the end of my talk, but it's not the end of the story. Because the end of the story only comes when adults have legal access to cannabis in all its forms, for all purposes, including the right to grow it for themselves. Thank you very much. And if I've got any questions, I'm happy to take them. We got a question. At last.
Given the current legislation based on cannabis as a general plant and the legal status of it, various different local constabularies have different viewpoints on it all across the UK, many of which have actually says that they want it to purely be legalised because of the manner it's been put in versus the prosecution rates compared to obviously what comes of it. Now, again, you mentioned about the conspiracy theories, but I suppose you could relate it to that, but also it's factual evidence if you look into it. For years, the UK have said that there's no medicinal purposes for cannabis, but yet Theresa May's husband obviously is the largest producer and exporter of it for medicinal related purposes. So that could have raised the question that whilst there are powers that be higher up that have that vetted interest, obviously financially within that thing, would it actually be legalised? Because obviously, as much as we want it to, as a society, surely that they want to hold on to that golden nugget as long as possible. What's your viewpoint on that?
Okay. There is no doubt that there is, and I use the words without any apology, there is deep-seated corruption about cannabis at the top of our political system. No doubt about it at all. And it's sickening. However, I must correct you on one point, on the first point you made, and it's a mistake that many people make. I'm no friend of Philip May. I'm even less of a friend of Theresa May. All right, but Philip May does not grow cannabis. Philip May does not produce cannabis. Philip May is an employee of the Capital Group, which owns most of the shares in GW Pharmaceuticals. So, I mean, when you say Philip May grows cannabis or produces cannabis, if you've got a pension fund which has got shares in BP, it's a bit like saying you're drilling in oil. So it's a vast exaggeration. I understand how you feel about it, but it's a vast over-exaggeration of the reality. But the fact that the May family and the Atkins/Kenwood family make personal financial gain out of legal cannabis, out of licensed cannabis, which licenses they deny to anybody else, is a scandal of the highest order. I mean, I don't know why, it's a scandal. I can't think of anything else as serious. It's disgraceful, and if those 650 scumbags in Parliament had any conscience at all, that's something else they would be, kicking a fuss up about, because it just cannot be allowed to persist. I'm very optimistic about the future. I mean, it's no secret that, I have been a Tory for most of my life. I actually resigned from the Conservative Party when Theresa May became leader. And I'm tempted at the moment. I don't give Boris a blank cheque by any means, but I am very optimistic about him. I think if he gets through Brexit and gets through the next election, he is a Liberal at heart. We all know he indulged frequently. not just in cannabis, throughout his younger days. I believe he's a liberal in the broadest sense. I'm a liberal. You know, if I could join the Liberal Democrats, I would, but the Liberal Democrats are just about the most illiberal party in the country. It's always been the most anti-democratic. And I am optimistic about Boris. I think he could see it very much as an opportunity. You know, legalising cannabis, legalising, regulating and taxing cannabis is a very Tory policy. It's about business, it's about opportunity, it's about enterprise. So I really think it's something that he, you know, particularly with, you know, influence from the States, which is on the brink, I really think I think we're going to get there a lot quicker than many people think now. I know the MPs went to Canada recently, came back saying 5 to 10 years. I'm pretty confident it'll be within 5. And I think it could be as soon as within 2. And I think also another key point, which I made during Mike's talk yesterday, was that because of all the issues with medical cannabis and with the medical profession, I think we have to keep going that way. We have to go through clinical trials and all those processes. But I think the only way that we're actually going to get cannabis to all the people who need it is through general legalization. The progress on the medical side has been good, but it isn't going to happen fast enough, and it isn't going to happen wholeheartedly enough, if you want. So full legalization is where we have to go until we reach this end objective.
Anybody else? Any more questions?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.